Hello, welcome to Cafe Stories. This is June, your host for today's story. Today we're diving into Lady Molly and the Poisoned Parasol, where Scotland Yard's brilliant female detective investigates a death at a finishing school involving an elegant but deadly accessory. Let's get started with the story, shall we? Lady Molly and the Poisoned Parasol. Chapter 1. A most peculiar morning. It has often occurred to me, in my years of service alongside Lady Molly Robertson Kirk, that the most sinister of crimes often take place in the most genteel of settings. No place better illustrates this truth than the perfectly manicured gardens of Millbrook House, on that fateful morning in early June 1899. I remember the day with remarkable clarity. The air was heavy with the scent of blooming roses, and the gentle buzz of conversation drifted across the lawn, where London's finest young ladies were gathered for their weekly etiquette instruction. Miss Eleanor Fairfax, standing gracefully beneath her ivory silk parasol, was the very picture of sophistication, as she demonstrated the proper way to handle one's accessories during a garden promenade. "The angle, ladies, is everything," she was saying, adjusting her parasol with delicate precision. Too high suggests unseemly boldness. Too low betrays a lack of proper breeding. Her voice carried clearly across the lawn, where 24 young women watched with rapt attention. I had accompanied Lady Molly to Millbrook House that morning on what we believed would be a routine inquiry into some missing correspondence. Neither of us could have anticipated the horror that would unfold before our eyes. Miss Fairfax had just begun to explain the intricacies of parasol placement when she faltered mid-sentence. The ivory parasol tilted oddly, and her gloved hand trembled. "I feel rather," she managed to whisper before crumpling to the ground, her fashionable skirts spreading around her like fallen petals. The chaos that erupted was precisely what one might expect from a gathering of well-bred young ladies. A symphony of gasps, screams, and fluttering handkerchiefs. But Lady Molly's reaction was markedly different. While others rushed forward, she remained perfectly still, her keen eyes taking in every detail of the scene before her. "Mary," she murmured to me, "observe the lady's gloves." I looked, but saw nothing remarkable about the pristine white kid leather gloves that adorned Miss Fairfax's motionless hands. Yet Lady Molly's expression told me she had noticed something significant. Chief Inspector Saunders arrived within the hour, his presence drawing a new wave of agitation from the assembled young ladies. "A tragic accident," he declared after his initial investigation, "or perhaps something more deliberate. I understand the lady's fiancé was recently seen in the area despite their broken engagement." Lady Molly's lips curved into the slight smile I had come to recognise as a sign that she saw something the rest of us had missed. She moved forward with characteristic grace, her skirts whispering against the grass as she knelt beside the victim. "Chief Inspector," she said softly, "might I draw your attention to a few rather curious details?" Her gloved hand hovered over Miss Fairfax's right glove. "Notice the wear pattern here, along the thumb and forefinger. Rather unusual for a left-handed lady, wouldn't you agree?" Saunders frowned. "Left-handed, you say? And you know this how, Lady Molly?" The angle of her writing desk, visible through the morning-room window, is arranged for a left-handed person. Moreover, the wear on her penholder, which I observed during our brief meeting this morning, confirms it. She gestured to the parasol, which lay at an odd angle. Yet she was holding her parasol in her right hand when she fell, contrary to her natural inclination. I watched in familiar amazement as Lady Molly's delicate fingers traced the parasol's handle. "See here, Chief Inspector, how the ivory handle has been ever so slightly modified. A curious alteration for such an expensive piece." Saunders shook his head. "With all due respect, Lady Molly, I fail to see how these minor details compare to the fact that Mr. James Crawford was seen arguing with the deceased just yesterday. A man's lost fortune can drive him to desperate acts." "Perhaps," Lady Molly conceded, though her tone suggested otherwise. "But tell me, Chief Inspector, why would a woman known for her impeccable attention to social graces commit such a fundamental breach of etiquette as switching her parasol to her less practised hand during a demonstration of proper form?" She rose gracefully, brushing an invisible speck of dust from her skirts. "I believe, Inspector, that this case will prove far more complex than a spurned suitor's revenge. Mary," she turned to me, her eyes bright with that familiar spark that told me we were embarking on another fascinating investigation. "I believe we shall need to pay particularly close attention to the ladies' accessories in this establishment." As we departed Millbrook House that morning, leaving Saunders to his inquiry into Mr. Crawford's whereabouts, I couldn't help but notice Lady Molly's thoughtful expression. "There is something altogether fascinating about this case, Mary," she said quietly. "A woman of Miss Fairfax's experience would never commit such a basic error in etiquette without compelling reason. The question is, what forced her hand? Looking back now, I realise that simple question would lead us down a path of intrigue that none of us could have anticipated. But then that was often the way with Lady Molly's cases. What appeared on the surface to be a straightforward tragedy would inevitably reveal layers of complexity that only her unique understanding of society's hidden workings could unravel. As our carriage pulled away from Millbrook House, the morning sun caught the gleam of dozens of parasols on the lawn, each one held at the precisely correct angle by young ladies who had no idea that their lessons in social graces had just become part of a much darker education indeed. Chapter 2. The Ladies of Millbrook House. That afternoon found us back at Millbrook House, though under decidedly different circumstances than our morning visit. The garden was now eerily empty, the scene of Miss Fairfax's collapse cordoned off with a discreet rope barrier. The young ladies had been sequestered inside, their etiquette lessons replaced by hushed conversations and tearful reflections on the morning's tragedy. Lady Molly had insisted on returning immediately, despite Chief Inspector Saunders' obvious reluctance to involve her further in what he considered a straightforward case of revenge. "It is imperative, Mary," she had explained to me in our carriage, "that we speak with the students while their memories of this morning remain fresh and uncontaminated by collective speculation." We were received in the drawing-room by Madame Beaumont, the French headmistress, whose reputation for transforming even the most awkward country girl into a paragon of society, manners had made Millbrook House the finishing school of choice for England's most prestigious families. "Such a terrible tragedy," she lamented, her English perfect though tinged with a Parisian accent. Miss Fairfax was our most accomplished instructor. The young ladies adored her. I observed Madame Beaumont carefully as Lady Molly engaged her in conversation. She was a woman of perhaps 50 years, impeccably attired in black silk that rustled authoritatively with her every movement. Her dark hair, threaded with silver, was arranged in a severe style that emphasized her aquiline features. Everything about her spoke of precision and control, from the exact angle of her collar to the measured cadence of her speech. "I understand," said Lady Molly, accepting the cup of tea offered by a subdued maid, "that Miss Fairfax joined your staff relatively recently." "Just this past winter," Madame Beaumont confirmed. "She came with the highest recommendations from Lady Westmoreland. Her understanding of social graces was exceptional, even by Millbrook standards. And she was particularly known for her expertise with accessories, was she not?" Lady Molly inquired, her voice casual, though I recognised the deliberate probing beneath her light tone. A flicker of something concern, wariness, passed across Madame Beaumont's features. Indeed, Miss Fairfax had connections to several exclusive Parisian fashion houses. Her lessons on the proper selection and handling of parasols, gloves, and fans were particularly sought after. Lady Molly nodded thoughtfully. "I wonder, Madame, if I might examine the school's collection of instructional parasols? I understand such items are kept for teaching purposes." Madame Beaumont hesitated almost imperceptibly before inclining her head. "Of course, they are kept in the accessories cabinet in the East Wing classroom. Miss Wyndham," she gestured to a pale, blonde girl who had been hovering near the doorway, "please show Lady Molly to Miss Fairfax's classroom." As we followed the silent girl through the corridors of Millbrook House, I noted Lady Molly's thoughtful expression. "You suspect something about the parasols," I murmured, careful to keep my voice below Miss Wyndham's hearing. "I merely wish to confirm a theory, Mary," she replied softly. "Observe the young ladies carefully. Their reactions may tell us much that their words conceal." The East Wing classroom was a bright, airy room with large windows overlooking the garden where Miss Fairfax had collapsed. A large cabinet of polished mahogany stood against one wall, its glass doors revealing dozens of ladies' accessories arranged with meticulous precision. Lady Molly approached it with keen interest. "Miss Wyndham, I understand you were one of Miss Fairfax's students this morning?" The girl nodded, twisting her handkerchief between slender fingers. "Yes, ma'am. I was standing quite near her when it happened." "And did you notice anything unusual about her behaviour before she collapsed?" Miss Wyndham considered this. She seemed perfectly normal until that final moment. Though she hesitated. "Yes," Lady Molly encouraged gently. "It may be nothing, but she did fumble slightly with the parasol, most unlike her. Miss Fairfax was always so graceful." Lady Molly nodded, turning her attention to the cabinet. "Might I?" she gestured, and Miss Wyndham hurried to unlock it with a small key produced from her pocket. The collection within was impressive. Parasols of every conceivable material and design, from practical cotton to elaborate silk creations, adorned with lace and embroidery. Lady Molly examined them with experienced eyes, paying particular attention to the handles. Most educational establishments keep their accessories in storage when not in use, she remarked casually. Yet these appear to be regularly handled. Miss Fairfax believed in practical application, came a new voice from the doorway. A tall girl with auburn hair had entered, her expression carefully composed, though her eyes were red-rimmed. We practice with them daily. Miss Harrington, Miss Wyndham explained, another of Miss Fairfax's advanced students. Lady Molly nodded in greeting. And was the parasol Miss Fairfax used this morning part of this collection? The two girls exchanged a quick glance. No, Miss Harrington replied. That was her personal parasol. She always used her own for demonstrations. A third girl appeared in the doorway, shorter than the others, with dark curly hair and a determined expression. They're saying Mr. Crawford poisoned her, she announced without preamble. Chief Inspector Saunders has men searching for him in the village. Miss Davis, Miss Wyndham hissed, shooting her a warning look. Lady Molly turned her attention to the newcomer. You've heard something of the investigation. Miss Davis shrugged. The maids talk. They say Mr. Crawford was desperate after losing his investments, and Miss Fairfax breaking their engagement was the final straw. An obvious motive, Lady Molly agreed mildly, though I recognised her tone as one that suggested she found it perhaps too obvious. She had returned her attention to the parasols, running her gloved finger along the handle of a particularly elegant specimen. Tell me, ladies, did Miss Fairfax ever receive packages from France? Perhaps from her connections in the fashion industry? Another exchanged glance between the girls. Every month, Miss Davis offered. Madame Beaumont would distribute them herself during their private French conversations. Lady Molly's eyes brightened with interest. Indeed. How fascinating. She carefully replaced the parasol she had been examining and closed the cabinet. One final question, if I may. Did any of you notice a peculiar scent around Miss Fairfax this morning? Perhaps something slightly bitter or almond-like? The three girls looked at each other, confusion evident on their faces. Nothing unusual, Miss Wyndham began, but Miss Harrington interrupted. Only her usual perfume. Jasmine, I believe, and perhaps a hint of something else. Leather, possibly, from her new gloves. Lady Molly smiled enigmatically. Thank you, ladies. You've been most helpful. She turned to me. Come, Mary. I believe we should examine Miss Fairfax's quarters before we depart. As we left the young ladies behind, I noticed Lady Molly's expression had transformed to one I knew well. The look of a hunter who has just discovered fresh tracks. Whatever she had found among those parasols, it had confirmed something significant in her mind. What did you see? I whispered as we walked. Not what I saw, Mary, she replied quietly, but what I felt. The ribs of that white silk parasol have been modified. And if I'm not mistaken, we shall find something most illuminating in Miss Fairfax's correspondence. Chapter 3. The Dressmaker's Secret. The following morning found Lady Molly and me in a hansom cab, winding through the narrow streets of London's fashion district. The drizzle that had begun at dawn shrouded the city in a pearl-grey mist, lending an air of secrecy to our expedition that seemed altogether appropriate given the curious developments of the previous day. Our examination of Miss Fairfax's quarters at Millbrook House had yielded several items of interest, chief among them a carefully concealed notebook containing coded entries in what Lady Molly identified as a modified millinery shorthand. More intriguing still was a letter half burned in the grate bearing the address of one Mrs. Henderson, modiste, of Bond Street. "It is most curious, Mary," Lady Molly had remarked as we departed Millbrook House, "that a lady in Miss Fairfax's position should find it necessary to burn correspondence from a dressmaker. One might almost think she feared discovery." Now, as our cab drew to a halt before a discreet establishment with "Henderson and Daughters Modistes" inscribed in elegant gold lettering upon the window, I observed Lady Molly's expression of keen anticipation. She had spent much of the night decoding portions of Miss Fairfax's notebook, and though she had shared little of what she discovered, I knew from experience that she must have found something significant. "Mrs. Henderson," Lady Molly explained as we alighted, "is known in certain circles for her remarkable innovations in ladies' accessories. Her parasols in particular are said to incorporate features not found in more common establishments. The shop interior was a testament to refined luxury. Silks in jewel tones draped along the walls, while glass cabinets displayed an array of exquisite accessories. A bell tinkled softly as we entered, and moments later a woman emerged from the back room. She was perhaps 60, with shrewd eyes and fingers that, despite their age, moved with nimble precision as she adjusted a half-completed hat on a nearby stand. "Lady Molly Robertson Kirk," my companion introduced herself. "And this is Miss Granard. We have come regarding Miss Eleanor Fairfax." The name produced an immediate reaction. Mrs. Henderson's fingers stilled, and her expression flickered momentarily before settling into a mask of professional composure. "A tragic business," she murmured. "Such a distinguished young lady. How may I be of service?" "I understand Miss Fairfax was a valued customer," Lady Molly said, moving toward a display of parasols with apparent casualness. "Did she perhaps commission any special items recently?" Mrs. Henderson hesitated, her eyes following Lady Molly's movements. Miss Fairfax had particular tastes. She appreciated quality and innovation. Lady Molly lifted a parasol of midnight blue silk, examining its handle with those discerning eyes that missed nothing. Innovations such as this, perhaps. A most unusual mechanism within the handle, is it not? The shopkeeper's posture stiffened almost imperceptibly. "Many of our clients prefer parasols that can be opened with particular ease," she replied, "especially those who, like Miss Fairfax, demonstrate their use to others." "Indeed." Lady Molly replaced the parasol and selected another, this one of emerald green with an ivory handle. "And this design, I note it bears a remarkable similarity to the one Miss Fairfax was carrying when she died." Mrs. Henderson moved forward, taking the parasol from Lady Molly's hands with gentle firmness. "Many of our designs share common features, my lady. It is our signature style. I imagine such distinctive pieces require special materials," Lady Molly continued, undeterred. "Imported, perhaps?" A silence fell between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. I watched as Mrs. Henderson appeared to reach some internal decision. "Perhaps we might speak more privately," she suggested, gesturing toward the back room. "Sarah, mind the shop," she called to a young assistant I hadn't noticed before. The workroom beyond was a marvel of organised industry. Half-completed hats and parasols occupied various stations, while bolts of fabric lined the walls in a rainbow of colours and textures. Mrs. Henderson closed the door firmly behind us and turned to face Lady Molly with new resolution in her expression. "You are from Scotland Yard?" she stated rather than asked. "Is this about the French shipments?" Lady Molly's eyebrows rose slightly, the only indication of surprise she permitted herself. "Should it be, Mrs. Henderson?" The modiste sighed, suddenly looking every one of her 60 years. "Miss Fairfax came to me nearly 3 months ago. She had concerns about certain modifications being requested for parasols destined for Millbrook House." "What manner of modifications?" Lady Molly inquired, her voice gentle yet insistent. "Hollow chambers within the handles and ribs, unusually constructed ferrules with hidden compartments." Mrs. Henderson moved to a drawer and withdrew a technical drawing. "She asked me to document the changes, said she suspected something improper but needed evidence." Lady Molly examined the drawing with intense concentration, her gloved finger tracing the intricate design. "These are remarkably clever concealments," she observed. "One might transport any number of small items undetected in such spaces." "Precisely what troubled Miss Fairfax," Mrs. Henderson agreed, "particularly when the orders came with specific requirements for the dimensions of these hidden chambers." "And who placed these orders?" I ventured to ask. "They came through Miss Fairfax, initially," the modiste replied, "but the specifications—" She hesitated. "Those came from Madame Beaumont herself." Lady Molly's gaze sharpened. "Did Miss Fairfax indicate what she intended to do with this information?" "Only that she was keeping a record. She seemed afraid, my lady. The last time she visited, she inquired whether such chambers might be used to transport poison." A cold shiver ran through me at these words. Lady Molly, however, remained outwardly calm, though I detected the heightened alertness in her posture that always accompanied a significant discovery. "May I keep this drawing, Mrs. Henderson?" she asked. "It may prove vital to our investigation." The modiste nodded. "Take it, but I pray you'll be discreet. I have my business to consider, and some of my clients are influential." As we departed the shop, the drizzle had intensified into a steady rain. Lady Molly hailed a cab with remarkable efficiency, and we had just settled inside when 2 men in dark coats emerged from a nearby alley, their attention fixed intently on Mrs. Henderson's shop. "It seems we're not the only ones interested in Parasol design," Lady Molly observed quietly. "Driver," she called through the trap, "Scotland Yard, if you please, and make haste." The cab had barely begun moving when a sharp crack split the air, a sound I recognised instantly as a pistol shot. Lady Molly gripped my arm, her eyes alert but unflinching. "It appears, Mary," she said with characteristic composure, "that we have stumbled upon something considerably more dangerous than a matter of fashion. Those parasols are at the centre of a very dark business indeed." As our cab clattered through the rain-slick streets, I found myself wondering just how deep this conspiracy reached, and whether Lady Molly herself might now be in danger for having uncovered it. Chapter 4. Tea and Consequences. Our return to Millbrook House occurred with rather more haste than either of us had anticipated. The gunshot in London's fashion district had been followed by a commotion that drew considerable police attention, though, as Lady Molly observed, with that quiet perspicacity which I had grown to admire, the timing was perhaps fortuitous for those who wished to remove evidence from Mrs. Henderson's establishment. "We shall not find what we need there now, Mary," she had remarked as our cab carried us away. Those who arranged this disturbance will have ensured that any further Parasol designs of interest have been removed. By afternoon, we were once again traversing the gravel drive of Millbrook House, where the previous day's tragedy seemed to have settled into a sombre acceptance. The students, we learned, had been granted a day of quiet reflection in honour of Miss Fairfax, though classes were to resume the following morning. "How extraordinarily convenient," murmured Lady Molly, as we were shown into the drawing-room. "A day without instruction gives ample time to conceal evidence." Madame Beaumont received us with the same perfectly maintained composure as before, though I fancied I detected a certain wariness in her gaze as it rested upon Lady Molly. "You honour us with a second visit," she said, gesturing toward the tea service a maid had just wheeled in. "Though, I confess, I am uncertain what more we can offer to your investigation." "Merely a few additional questions," Lady Molly replied with disarming simplicity. "And perhaps the opportunity to observe some of your students in a more settled state than yesterday." "Of course. They have been taking tea in the conservatory this afternoon. I shall have them join us." As Madame Beaumont issued instructions to the hovering maid, Lady Molly leaned toward me slightly. "Observe everything, Mary," she whispered, "particularly how they handle their teacups." I had barely time to wonder at this curious directive before the door opened to admit several young ladies, among them the 3 we had interviewed the previous day. Miss Isabel Wyndham led the group, her pale blonde hair arranged in an elegant coiffure that seemed remarkable for one so young. She was followed by Miss Harrington and Miss Davis, along with 3 other students I had not previously met. "Ladies," Madame Beaumont addressed them, "Lady Molly wishes to ask a few more questions about poor Miss Fairfax. Please do be seated and take tea." The young women arranged themselves with the precise grace that spoke of countless hours of deportment training. I noticed that each took her place according to what appeared to be a well-established hierarchy, with Miss Wyndham occupying the seat nearest to Madame Beaumont. As tea was poured, Lady Molly engaged in seemingly casual conversation about the day's activities, yet I recognised the careful strategy behind her apparently random questions. She was establishing patterns of behaviour, observing which girls deferred to others, noting the subtle alliances revealed through glances and gestures. "I understand," she said at length, accepting a delicate porcelain cup. "That part of your education here involves familiarity with social customs beyond England's shores." "Indeed," Madame Beaumont confirmed. "Our young ladies must be prepared for society in any European capital." "We study French, German and Italian customs particularly," offered Miss Wyndham. "Madam believes a true lady must navigate continental society with the same ease as London drawing-rooms." Lady Molly nodded appreciatively. "A most forward-thinking approach. And do you study the commerce of these nations as well? I imagine such knowledge would be valuable for young ladies whose families maintain international interests." A curious tension seemed to descend upon the room. Miss Wyndham's fingers tightened almost imperceptibly around the handle of her teacup. "We have some instruction in such matters," she replied carefully. "My own father's shipping concerns have connections in Marseille and Le Havre. Madame has been most helpful in explaining the particular requirements of French commerce." "Fascinating," Lady Molly remarked. The movement of goods between nations requires such precise understanding of regulations. Tell me, in your studies of French etiquette, have you learned the correct method of parasol management during promenades? The abrupt change of subject appeared to momentarily disconcert the students, though Madame Beaumont's expression remained impassive. Perhaps, Lady Molly continued, setting down her teacup, you might demonstrate. I find myself particularly interested in the techniques Miss Fairfax was teaching on the morning of her unfortunate collapse. Madame Beaumont began to object, but Lady Molly pressed on with gentle insistence. A simple demonstration would be most illuminating, perhaps using the very parasols from your accessory cabinet. To my surprise, it was Miss Davis who rose to the challenge. I should be happy to demonstrate, she declared. Shall I fetch the parasols, madame? A silent communication seemed to pass between the headmistress and student before Madame Beaumont inclined her head in acquiescence. Very well, but only briefly. The young ladies have had a trying day. Miss Davis departed and returned moments later with 3 parasols, distributing them to herself, Miss Wyndham, and Miss Harrington. The 3 young women positioned themselves in the centre of the room and began a carefully choreographed display of parasol etiquette. Lady Molly watched with unwavering attention as the students demonstrated the proper angle for morning walks, the correct tilt for acknowledging acquaintances, and the subtle adjustments that conveyed various social messages. And for receiving a gentleman's card, Lady Molly inquired. Miss Wyndham stepped forward, adjusting her parasol to rest against her left shoulder, while extending her right hand in a practised gesture. One must maintain proper shade while accepting such attention, she explained. The parasol remains perfectly balanced. Most impressive, Lady Molly commented. Though I notice you all favour your right hands. Was Miss Fairfax not left-handed? Did she teach you to accommodate such differences? The question hung in the air for a pregnant moment before our discussion was interrupted by the arrival of Chief Inspector Saunders. He entered with the brisk authority of a man bearing significant news. Lady Molly, he greeted her with a curt nod. I thought you should know immediately. We have apprehended Mr. Crawford. He was attempting to book passage to America under an assumed name. Indeed, Lady Molly's expression revealed nothing of her thoughts. And have you evidence connecting him to Miss Fairfax's death? Conclusive evidence, Saunders affirmed with satisfaction. A vial of poison was discovered among his possessions. Prussic acid of the same type that the preliminary medical report suggests was used against Miss Fairfax. The case is all but closed. How very tidy, remarked Lady Molly, though I detected the slight inflection that suggested she found it perhaps too tidy. Her gaze returned to the students who had lowered their parasols during the inspector's announcement. I wonder, Chief Inspector, if you noticed something rather curious about these young ladies' demonstration just now. Saunders frowned. I'm afraid I arrived too late to observe anything of the sort. Precisely my point, Lady Molly replied enigmatically. Rising from her seat, she approached Miss Wyndham and gently took the parasol from her hands. Tell me, Miss Wyndham, have you ever noticed how the handle of this parasol unscrews? Just so. With a deft movement, she twisted the handle, revealing a small hidden compartment within. The reaction around the room was immediate. Madame Beaumont half rose from her seat, while Miss Harrington let out a small gasp. Inspector Saunders stepped forward with renewed interest. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded. Lady Molly smiled that enigmatic smile I knew so well. "I believe, Chief Inspector, that your tidy case may require some significant revision. These parasols hold secrets that poor Miss Fairfax discovered, a discovery that I fear proved fatal." Chapter 5. The French Letter. Chief Inspector Saunders's reaction to Lady Molly's dramatic revelation was precisely what one might have expected from a man whose carefully constructed case had just begun to unravel before his eyes. His moustache twitched with barely suppressed irritation as he examined the hidden compartment within the parasol's handle. "This proves nothing," he declared, though his tone lacked conviction. "Crawford had both motive and means. The poison was found in his possession." "A curious coincidence indeed," Lady Molly replied, with that gentle insistence which I had seen dismantle the most stubborn of official resistances. Though one might wonder why a man planning to flee the country would retain incriminating evidence rather than disposing of it. The parasol demonstration had been hastily concluded. The young ladies dismissed to their rooms with murmured instructions from Madame Beaumont that I could not quite catch. Only Miss Wyndham lingered momentarily in the doorway, her pale eyes meeting Lady Molly's in a glance that seemed weighted with unspoken meaning. Once alone with the Chief Inspector and Madame Beaumont, Lady Molly pressed her advantage. "I should like to examine Miss Fairfax's personal correspondence more thoroughly," she requested, "particularly any letters from France that may have arrived in recent months." "I'm afraid that won't be possible," Madame Beaumont responded with cool precision. "Miss Fairfax's personal effects have already been packed for return to her family." "All of them?" Lady Molly inquired, one delicate eyebrow arched in polite scepticism. "Even those documents related to school business? Surely those would remain property of Millbrook House." A moment of tension stretched between them before Madame Beaumont conceded with a slight inclination of her head. "There may be some papers in her desk in the staff study. You are welcome to examine those, though I doubt they will reveal anything of significance." The staff study proved to be a small but elegant room lined with bookshelves and furnished with 3 writing desks, each labelled with a small silver nameplate. Miss Fairfax's desk was positioned near the window, affording a clear view of the gardens where she had met her end. Lady Molly seated herself and began a methodical examination of the contents, which had been organised with the same meticulous precision evident in every aspect of Millbrook House. While Chief Inspector Saunders hovered impatiently near the door, clearly eager to return to his prisoner, I observed Lady Molly's swift, practised movements as she sorted through papers, ledgers, and correspondence. "How curious," she murmured after several minutes. "Miss Fairfax appears to have maintained a separate record of certain shipments from Paris. See here, Mary." She indicated a small leather-bound notebook hidden beneath a blotter. "These entries are coded, but the pattern is similar to that used by milliners for their private accounts." I peered over her shoulder at the neat columns of symbols and abbreviations, incomprehensible to my untrained eye, but evidently revealing to Lady Molly's experienced gaze. "A standard substitution cipher," she explained, though modified with dressmaking terms. "This entry here, 3 arcs, 4 épines, 3 bows, 4 pins, likely refers to something entirely different." "Lady Molly," interrupted the Chief Inspector with evident exasperation, "while these fashion notes may hold some interest for the ladies, they hardly supersede the evidence against Crawford." "On the contrary," Lady Molly replied, not looking up from the notebook. "They may explain precisely why that evidence exists at all. Tell me, Madame Beaumont," she addressed the headmistress, who had remained silent by the doorway, "are you familiar with the shipping company Mercier et Fess?" The question produced a subtle but unmistakable reaction, a momentary stillness, swiftly concealed. "They are one of several firms that transport goods from Paris to London," Madame Beaumont acknowledged. "Many fashion houses use their services." "Indeed, and Millbrook House appears to receive remarkably frequent shipments for a school of this size." Lady Molly had moved her attention to a ledger found in another drawer. "Monthly deliveries, all recorded under educational supplies, yet the amounts paid correspond more closely to luxury goods than teaching materials." Madame Beaumont's composure remained intact, though a faint flush had risen to her cheeks. "We maintain the highest standards for our young ladies. Quality commands its price." "So it does," Lady Molly agreed pleasantly. "Chief Inspector, I wonder if you might inquire whether any shipments have arrived from Paris in the past week? The customs records would confirm." Saunders hesitated, clearly torn between his completed case and the disturbing implications of Lady Molly's discoveries. "I shall make inquiries," he conceded reluctantly, "though I maintain that Crawford's guilt is all but certain." Left alone with Madame Beaumont, Lady Molly continued her examination in silence for several minutes before looking up with an expression of innocent inquiry. "Tell me, madame, is Miss Wyndham's father involved with Mercier et Fils? I believe she mentioned family shipping connections to French ports." "The Wyndham shipping interests are extensive," Madame replied, her accent becoming subtly more pronounced, a detail I had noticed occurred when she felt under pressure. "I do not concern myself with such commercial matters." "Of course not," Lady Molly agreed, "though it seems Miss Fairfax took a rather keen interest. This letter, for instance," she withdrew a folded paper from within the notebook, "appears to be a partial inventory of items not listed in your official ledgers." The letter was written in French, the elegant script detailing what appeared to be a list of accessories with curious annotations regarding weights and dimensions. Lady Molly studied it briefly before tucking it into her reticule. "I believe this requires further translation," she remarked. "Perhaps you would be so kind as to show us to our rooms." The Chief Inspector suggested we might stay the night to continue our inquiries tomorrow. That evening, while Lady Molly requested a private dinner in our rooms to study the documents, I found myself restlessly pacing the corridor outside. The house had fallen quiet, the students presumably retired for the evening, when I noticed a flicker of movement at the end of the hallway. A side door had opened, admitting a tall figure in a dark coat who moved with the cautious steps of someone unwilling to announce their presence. Concealing myself behind a heavy curtain, I watched as Madame Beaumont emerged from her office to greet the visitor. Their whispered conversation was too distant to overhear, but the urgency of their gestures suggested matters of considerable importance. The stranger handed her a small package, which she quickly secreted within her dress before leading him further into the private areas of the house. I hurried back to inform Lady Molly of this clandestine meeting, finding her bent over Miss Fairfax's notebook with several sheets of paper covered in her own elegant handwriting. "Mary," she greeted me with unusual excitement, "I have deciphered enough to confirm my suspicions. These parasols are indeed being used to smuggle something of considerable value. Tomorrow we must—" She was interrupted by a sharp knock at our door. Miss Harrington stood in the hallway, her face pale with alarm. "Please," she gasped, "you must come quickly. It's Miss Wyndham. She's collapsed in the library, just like Miss Fairfax, and she was holding one of the parasols." Lady Molly was on her feet in an instant, gathering her shawl. As we hurried through the corridors, she gripped my arm with unexpected force. "Stay close, Mary," she whispered. "If I am correct, we are witnessing not an accident, but a deliberate silencing. Miss Wyndham knows something, and someone is determined she shall not share that knowledge with us." Chapter 6. Shadows and Silk. The scene that greeted us in the library of Millbrook House was one of controlled chaos. Miss Isabel Wyndham lay upon a chaise longue, her fair hair splayed against the dark upholstery like fallen gold, her complexion alarmingly pale. Unlike poor Miss Fairfax, however, she showed signs of life, her chest rising and falling with shallow breaths, her eyelids fluttering occasionally. Madame Beaumont knelt beside her, administering smelling salts with practised efficiency, while Miss Davis and Miss Harrington hovered anxiously nearby. The parasol that Miss Harrington had mentioned lay discarded on the carpet, its ivory handle gleaming in the lamplight. Lady Molly took in the scene with a swift, comprehensive glance, before moving decisively toward the prone figure. "Has a doctor been summoned?" she inquired, her tone calm but authoritative. "Dr. Wilson has been sent for," Madame Beaumont replied without looking up. "Though it appears to be merely a fainting spell. Miss Wyndham has always been of delicate constitution." "Indeed?" Lady Molly's eyebrow arched slightly as she knelt to examine the girl. Her gloved fingers pressed gently against Miss Wyndham's wrist, counting the pulse with practised precision. A curious coincidence, is it not, that she should collapse while handling a parasol, just as Miss Fairfax did? "The circumstances are entirely different," Madame Beaumont responded, though I detected a tremor in her voice that had not been present before. Miss Wyndham was simply studying late and overtaxed herself. Lady Molly made no direct reply, but turned her attention to the discarded parasol. With careful movements that I recognized from countless previous investigations, she examined it without touching, noting its position relative to the fallen girl. "Miss Harrington," she addressed the anxious student, "you discovered Miss Wyndham, did you not? Pray tell me exactly what you observed when you entered the room." The auburn-haired girl clasped and unclasped her hands nervously. "I came to return a book I had borrowed." Miss Wyndham was standing by the window, examining one of the parasols from the collection. "That one," she pointed to the object on the floor. She turned when I entered, seemed about to speak, and then simply crumpled. I caught her before she struck her head. And the parasol? It fell from her hand as she collapsed. Lady Molly nodded thoughtfully. You showed remarkable presence of mind, Miss Harrington. Now, if you would be so kind as to show me precisely which volume you came to return. The question appeared to disconcert the girl, but she moved obediently to a shelf near the door and indicated a leather-bound copy of Tennyson's poems. Lady Molly examined the book briefly before returning it to its place. Curious that Miss Wyndham should be studying parasols so intently at this late hour, she remarked, particularly after the events of recent days. She was, concerned, Miss Harrington offered hesitantly. After your questions this afternoon, she mentioned wanting to examine the parasols herself. At that moment, the library door opened to admit Chief Inspector Saunders, looking distinctly displeased at having his evening disturbed. Behind him came a portly gentleman whom I took to be Dr. Wilson, carrying a black medical bag. While the doctor attended to Miss Wyndham, Lady Molly drew the inspector aside, speaking in tones too low for others to overhear. I observed the changing expressions on his face, initial scepticism giving way gradually to reluctant consideration. As dawn broke the following morning, Miss Wyndham had been pronounced out of danger, though still weak from what Dr. Wilson described as nervous exhaustion complicated by exposure to some mild irritant. Lady Molly had insisted on remaining with the patient through the night, sending me to rest with instructions to join her early. When I entered Miss Wyndham's chamber shortly after sunrise, I found Lady Molly seated by the window, her keen eyes showing no signs of fatigue despite her vigil. The patient lay sleeping peacefully, her colour much improved. She spoke during the night, Lady Molly informed me in a whisper, most illuminating, though somewhat disjointed. Come, Mary, we have work to do while the house still slumbers. She led me not back to the library, but to a small door at the end of the east corridor, a door I had not previously noticed, partly concealed behind a tapestry. Miss Wyndham mentioned a hidden workroom. Lady Molly explained as she produced a small key, used supposedly for repairing damaged accessories, though I suspect its true purpose is somewhat different. It was a workshop indeed, but one of extraordinary sophistication. One wall was lined with shelves holding parasols in various stages of construction. Workbenches held delicate tools, specialised implements, and half-assembled mechanisms. Most striking of all was a large table in the centre, bearing what appeared to be technical drawings similar to those we had seen at Mrs. Henderson's shop, but far more detailed. Just as I suspected, Lady Molly murmured, moving swiftly to examine the drawings. Miss Fairfax discovered this place, Mary. According to Miss Wyndham, she had been increasingly troubled by certain inconsistencies in the school's accessory orders and began her own investigation. But what exactly was being smuggled, I asked, bewildered by the elaborate setup before us. Lady Molly's fingers traced a diagram showing the hollow construction of a parasol rib. Multiple possibilities. Jewels, certainly, given the dimensions of these concealed chambers, perhaps confidential documents, but most disturbing of all, she turned to a smaller drawing partially hidden beneath others, designs for delivering poison through the mechanism itself. I gasped as I studied the ingenious yet terrible design. A parasol constructed to release a fine mist of liquid when opened at a certain angle, the mechanism concealed within what appeared to be ordinary decorative elements. Miss Fairfax discovered this, Lady Molly continued, gathering several papers into her reticule. She kept her own records, cross-referenced shipments, and began to unravel the entire operation. When she confronted someone with her knowledge, she was silenced. I finished, the horror of it washing over me anew. Lady Molly nodded grimly. And when Miss Wyndham began asking questions after our arrival, she too became a target. Though fortunately the attempt was hurried and therefore less effective. As we carefully examined the rest of the workshop, Lady Molly reconstructed the sequence of events with that remarkable clarity of thought I had so often observed in her. Miss Fairfax, with her expertise in fashion and her connections to Mrs. Henderson, recognised the modifications to the parasols as something beyond mere style. She began tracking shipments, noting discrepancies. When she had gathered sufficient evidence, she approached someone she trusted or thought she could trust. Lady Molly paused before a small desk in the corner where a ledger lay open. This appears to be the master record of all transactions, names, dates, contents. She fell silent, studying one particular entry with unusual intensity. Mary, she said at length, we now have sufficient evidence to confront those responsible, but doing so directly would be dangerous. These people have already demonstrated they will not hesitate to eliminate threats. What shall we do then? I asked. Lady Molly's expression transformed into one I knew well, the look of a strategist who has just conceived a brilliant plan. We shall set a trap, Mary, one baited with the very thing they most fear, exposure. She quickly outlined her strategy as we made our way back upstairs, timing our return to avoid early rising students. The plan was both elegant and daring, relying on Lady Molly's understanding not just of criminal minds, but of the social dynamics that governed establishments like Millbrook House. I shall inform Chief Inspector Saunders that we have made a breakthrough regarding Crawford's case, she explained. That should secure his cooperation without revealing our true suspicions. Meanwhile, you and I shall prepare for tomorrow evening's musicale. Musicale? I echoed, confused. Lady Molly smiled that enigmatic smile that always presaged a dramatic resolution. Yes, Mary. Madame Beaumont mentioned it yesterday, a small gathering to raise the spirits of the students after recent tragedies. Every young lady will be present, demonstrating her accomplishments and carrying her parasol. Chapter 7. The Spider's Web. The day of the musical dawned clear and mild, with just enough crispness in the air to justify the wearing of one's finest accessories. Lady Molly had spent the morning closeted with Chief Inspector Saunders, sharing selected portions of our discoveries while carefully omitting others. I had observed this strategy of hers before, revealing enough to secure official support while withholding sufficient details to maintain the freedom of action so essential to her methods. The inspector remains convinced of Crawford's guilt, she informed me, as we prepared for the evening's events in our chambers. I have merely suggested that others may have been involved in a broader conspiracy, one which Crawford himself may have stumbled upon. And did he agree to your proposed arrangements for tonight? I inquired. watching as Lady Molly arranged her hair with characteristic precision. Reluctantly, she admitted with a slight smile that always accompanied her victories over official resistance. He has agreed to position constables discreetly around the grounds, though he considers it an excess of caution. More importantly, he has consented to delay any further questioning of Crawford until tomorrow. The musicale had been arranged in the grand salon of Millbrook House, a room of impressive proportions with gilt-edged mirrors and delicate frescoes adorning its high ceiling. By 7 o'clock, the space had been transformed with additional seating to accommodate not only the school's residents, but also several guests from the neighbouring estates. A gathering that Madame Beaumont had insisted was necessary to maintain the appearance of normality despite recent tragedies. Lady Molly and I arrived deliberately late, making our entrance just as Madame Beaumont completed her welcoming address. All eyes turned toward us as we were shown to seats near the front, providing an excellent view of both the performance area and the assembled audience. "Observe the parasols, Mary," Lady Molly murmured as we took our places. Indeed, each young lady present carried an exquisite parasol, despite the complete absence of any practical need for such accessories indoors. They were arranged neatly beside each chair, a forest of silk and lace in every imaginable hue. The programme commenced with a pianoforte performance by Miss Harrington, whose technical skill could not quite conceal her evident anxiety. She was followed by 2 younger students performing a French duet. Then a recitation of poetry by Miss Davis that would have been quite impressive had her voice not trembled on certain passages. Throughout these performances, Lady Molly's attention seemed divided between the stage and certain members of the audience. I followed her gaze to where Madame Beaumont sat with perfect composure, occasionally exchanging pleasant nods with various guests. Among these was a distinguished-looking gentleman whom I recognised as the mysterious visitor I had observed the previous night. "Sir Rowland Beaumont?" Lady Molly whispered, noting my interest. "Ostensibly, Madame's cousin, though one might wonder at their identical surnames if they share only a cousin's relation." The musicale continued with several more performances before a brief interval was announced, during which refreshments would be served in the adjoining conservatory. As the audience rose and began to move toward the refreshment area, Lady Molly took my arm with unusual firmness. "Now, Mary," she murmured, "we must proceed with great care. When I give the signal, you will approach Miss Wyndham, who has just entered, you see, despite her supposed convalescence, and request her assistance in examining the parasols left behind. Suggest that one appears to be missing." Miss Wyndham did indeed look remarkably recovered as she stood near the doorway, though a certain pallor remained beneath her composed expression. She held a parasol of pale blue silk that matched her evening gown, its ivory handle carved with remarkable intricacy. Lady Molly herself moved toward Madame Beaumont and Sir Rowland, engaging them in what appeared to be pleasant conversation, though I could see the alertness in her posture that signalled she was manoeuvring her quarry into position. Awaiting her signal, I observed the room with the careful attention she had taught me to cultivate. Most of the parasols remained beside the chairs, though several young ladies had chosen to carry theirs into the conservatory. Chief Inspector Saunders stood near a side entrance, attempting unsuccessfully to appear like an ordinary guest while his gaze continuously swept the room. A slight nod from Lady Molly sent me to Miss Wyndham's side, where I delivered my rehearsed inquiry. Miss Wyndham, Lady Molly has asked if you might assist us for a moment. There seems to be some confusion regarding the parasols. One appears to be missing from the collection. The girl's blue eyes widened slightly. Missing? But that would be most unusual. They are carefully counted after each lesson. She accompanied me willingly enough to the chairs where several parasols remained. As instructed by Lady Molly, I directed her attention to a particular ivory-handled specimen with deep crimson silk. This one seems different from the others, I remarked. The handle appears to have been modified. Miss Wyndham's reaction was immediate. A sharp intake of breath, and a quick glance toward Madame Beaumont, who remained in conversation with Lady Molly and Sir Rowland. "You should not touch that one," she whispered urgently. "It belongs to—" Her warning was interrupted by a sudden commotion from the conservatory. A young footman burst into the salon, his face pale with alarm. "Fire!" he cried. "There's smoke coming from the east wing." The ordered elegance of the musicale dissolved instantly into confusion. Guests rose in alarm, students clustered together in frightened groups, and Madame Beaumont called for calm with increasing urgency. In the chaos, I lost sight of Miss Wyndham momentarily. When I located her again, she was moving swiftly toward a side door, the pale blue parasol clutched tightly in her hand. Lady Molly, who had somehow extricated herself from Madame Beaumont's vicinity, appeared at my side. "Follow her, Mary, but maintain distance," she instructed. "I believe she is going to retrieve something she thinks we do not know about." We pursued Miss Wyndham through the corridors of Millbrook House, maintaining just enough distance to avoid detection. She led us not to her chambers, as I had expected, but to the hidden workroom we had discovered earlier. With remarkable composure for one so young, she unlocked the concealed door and disappeared inside. Lady Molly paused, listening intently. "We must wait," she whispered. "Let her retrieve whatever she seeks before we confront her." Barely 2 minutes had passed before Miss Wyndham emerged, now carrying not only her parasol, but also a small leather portfolio, which she had partially concealed within the folds of her dress. Her expression was one of determination, mingled with fear, as she turned not back toward the main house, but down a narrow corridor that I knew led to a side entrance. "Now," Lady Molly murmured, stepping forward to intercept the fleeing girl. "Miss Wyndham, I believe you have something that does not belong to you." The girl froze, her face pale in the dim corridor light. "Lady Molly, I was merely—" "Securing evidence, perhaps?" Lady Molly suggested gently. "Evidence that Miss Fairfax gathered before her untimely death." For a moment I thought Miss Wyndham might attempt to deny it, but instead her shoulders slumped in apparent defeat. "How did you know?" she asked softly. "Your parasol," Lady Molly replied. "Unlike the others, it has not been modified. You have been careful never to handle the altered ones directly, a precaution that saved your life when someone attempted to silence you, as they did Miss Fairfax." Before Miss Wyndham could respond, heavy footsteps echoed from the direction of the main house. Chief Inspector Saunders appeared, accompanied by 2 constables and, most surprisingly, Sir Rowland Beaumont. "Lady Molly," Saunders called out, "Sir Rowland has made a most serious accusation against you, interfering with an ongoing investigation and attempting to plant false evidence. The constables moved to flank us, while Sir Rowland stepped forward with the assured manner of one accustomed to authority. I'm afraid, Lady Molly, that your unorthodox methods have at last overstepped the bounds of propriety. This young lady, he gestured toward Miss Wyndham, was clearly coerced into removing documents from their proper place. Lady Molly's expression remained serenely untroubled, though I detected the slight tension in her posture that indicated matters had not proceeded entirely according to her plan. Indeed, Sir Rowland. And what proper place would that be? A hidden workshop where parasols are modified to smuggle valuables and deliver poison. For a fleeting instant, Sir Rowland's composure wavered, but he recovered with admirable swiftness. Chief Inspector, I believe we have indulged these amateur investigations long enough. Mr. Crawford awaits justice, and these ladies are merely creating distractions from that simple truth. To my dismay, Inspector Saunders nodded in agreement. I'm afraid I must ask you to return to your chambers, Lady Molly, and to refrain from further interference. The matter will be concluded tomorrow with Crawford's formal charging. As we were escorted back to our rooms, Miss Wyndham having been led away in another direction, I could not help but feel that our investigation had met with disastrous failure. The portfolio of evidence had been confiscated, our movements restricted, and our chief suspect now appeared to command the confidence of the official police. Yet Lady Molly, once we were alone, displayed none of the dejection I felt so keenly. She seated herself by the window, her expression thoughtful but not defeated. Do not despair, Mary, she said quietly. The spider's web has many strands, and we have merely tugged on one of them. Tomorrow's light will reveal the true pattern and the spider at its centre. Chapter 8. The Final Turn. I have often observed during my years of service with Lady Molly that the darkest moment of an investigation invariably precedes its most brilliant illumination. Yet, on that morning following our apparent defeat at Millbrook House, even my unwavering faith in her abilities was sorely tested. We had been permitted to breakfast in our chambers, though under what amounted to house arrest. Chief Inspector Saunders had made it abundantly clear that we were to depart for London by the noon train, our investigation considered not merely concluded, but actively obstructive to justice. Lady Molly, however, displayed none of the despondency that had settled upon my own spirits. She took her tea with the same elegant composure that characterised her actions in even the most desperate circumstances, pausing occasionally to make notations in a small notebook. You have a plan, I ventured at last, unable to contain my curiosity, despite our precarious situation. Indeed, Mary, she replied, glancing at the mantel clock. And it commences precisely at 9:30, when the young ladies of Millbrook House take their morning constitutional around the grounds, a practice which, I am reliably informed, continues regardless of recent upheavals. But how shall we participate when we are effectively confined to these rooms? Lady Molly's smile held that particular quality which always presaged her most audacious stratagems. Inspector Saunders has forbidden us from interfering with his investigation, certainly, but he has not expressly prohibited us from taking a morning walk for the benefit of our health. At 20 minutes past 9, Lady Molly rang for the maid and requested that a message be delivered to Chief Inspector Saunders, informing him of our intention to stroll upon the grounds before our departure. The request, phrased with such impeccable politeness that refusal would have seemed uncivil, was granted with reluctant acquiescence. As we descended to the entrance hall, I observed that Lady Molly had attired herself with particular care. Her walking costume of dove grey was accessorised with gloves of the finest kid leather and, most notably, a parasol of midnight blue silk that I recognised as having been borrowed from Miss Harrington's collection. The morning was fair, with just enough breeze to stir the leaves of the ancient oaks that dotted Millbrook's extensive grounds. As Lady Molly had anticipated, we soon encountered the procession of students taking their exercise under the watchful eye of a junior instructress. Miss Wyndham was notably absent, as was Miss Davis, but Miss Harrington walked at the head of the group, her expression brightening perceptibly at our approach. "A charming tradition, this morning walk," Lady Molly remarked to the instructress. "Might we join you briefly? We depart for London shortly and would value one last opportunity to admire the famous gardens." Permission granted, we fell into step beside Miss Harrington, who leaned toward Lady Molly with evident concern. "Is it true that you are leaving? That Crawford will be charged with Miss Fairfax's murder?" "That remains to be seen," Lady Molly replied cryptically. "I wonder, Miss Harrington, whether you might enlighten me on a point of Parasol etiquette. In your lessons with Miss Fairfax, did she ever demonstrate the correct method for accepting a gentleman's card while maintaining proper posture?" The question, seemingly irrelevant to our dire circumstances, nevertheless produced a flash of understanding in Miss Harrington's eyes. "Indeed she did, Lady Molly. Perhaps I might demonstrate. It requires rather specific positioning." Taking the parasol from Lady Molly's hands, Miss Harrington assumed a posture of perfect deportment, the parasol held at precisely the angle I had observed during the previous day's demonstration. One must maintain the parasol thus, with the handle positioned just so, while extending one's right hand to receive the card. Miss Fairfax was most particular about the angle. She said an error of even a few degrees would constitute a serious breach of etiquette. "Fascinating," Lady Molly murmured. "And this exact position was what Miss Fairfax demonstrated on the morning of her collapse?" "Yes," Miss Harrington confirmed. "She was showing us how a lady might gracefully manage her parasol when meeting a gentleman of consequence during a promenade." Our conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Madame Beaumont and Sir Rowland, who approached from the direction of the house, with Chief Inspector Saunders following close behind. The headmistress's expression was one of carefully controlled displeasure, while Sir Rowland regarded us with the cool assessment of a chess player contemplating a troublesome but ultimately doomed opponent. "Lady Molly," Madame Beaumont greeted us with brittle politeness, "I understood you were preparing for departure. I trust you find our grounds satisfactory for your final morning with us?" "More than satisfactory," Lady Molly replied pleasantly. "Miss Harrington has been enlightening me on the finer points of parasol etiquette, a subject in which Miss Fairfax was especially accomplished." "Indeed," Sir Rowland interjected smoothly, "a tragic loss to the educational community. But I understand the matter of her death has been resolved to the satisfaction of the authorities." He glanced meaningfully at Inspector Saunders, who stood with the uncomfortable posture of a man caught between competing loyalties. Almost resolved, Lady Molly corrected, accepting the parasol back from Miss Harrington. There remains the small matter of demonstrating precisely how the poison was administered. With a swift, graceful movement, she opened the parasol and held it at the exact angle Miss Harrington had just shown. Like this, I believe. A moment of confused silence followed, before Sir Rowland laughed, a sound containing more condescension than humour. My dear Lady Molly, this theatrical display hardly constitutes evidence. Inspector Saunders has concrete proof of Crawford's guilt. Concrete, yet curiously convenient, Lady Molly replied, her voice taking on the crisp precision that I knew preceded her most devastating revelations. Tell me, Sir Rowland, or should I address you as Monsieur Mercier? Did you arrange for the poison to be discovered among Crawford's possessions before or after you realised Miss Fairfax had uncovered your smuggling operation? The change that came over Sir Rowland's countenance was subtle but unmistakable, a momentary rigidity, a tightening around the eyes, swiftly controlled, but not before Lady Molly had observed it with evident satisfaction. Inspector, she continued, turning to Saunders, you have been pursuing the wrong criminal. Mr. Crawford is guilty only of financial misfortune and perhaps poor judgment in his romantic attachments. The true architects of Miss Fairfax's death stand before you, Sir Rowland Beaumont and Madame Beaumont, who are neither cousins nor, I suspect, legally entitled to the names they bear. With methodical precision, Lady Molly proceeded to unravel the entire scheme, how the parasols had been modified to smuggle precious stones and confidential documents between France and England, how Miss Fairfax had gradually discovered the operation through her expertise in fashion, and how she had been silenced when she confronted Madame Beaumont with her suspicions. Lady Molly explained, demonstrating how the parasol, when opened at a specific angle, would release a fine mist from its modified ribs. Miss Fairfax, demonstrating the proper etiquette position, unwittingly released the substance herself, a particularly cruel method that would leave no obvious trace of the murderer's hand. Throughout this revelation I had been watching Madame Beaumont, whose composure had begun to fracture in small but telling ways. A trembling hand, a flush rising beneath her pale complexion. Sir Rowland, however, maintained his aristocratic poise, even as Lady Molly produced from her reticule several papers I recognised from Miss Fairfax's notebook. Copies, she explained to the astonished inspector, made before our confrontation yesterday. The originals, I believe, are currently locked in Sir Rowland's desk, along with detailed records of the smuggling operation that has been conducted through Millbrook House these past 3 years. What followed occurred with such rapidity that even now, setting it down in careful order, I find it difficult to capture the chaotic intensity of those moments. Sir Rowland, abandoning all pretence of innocence, attempted to flee, only to find his path blocked by constables whom Lady Molly had arranged to be positioned around the grounds. Madame Beaumont, with unexpected swiftness, produced a small pistol from her skirts, aiming it not at Lady Molly, but at Miss Harrington, a desperate gambit that failed, when the young lady, displaying remarkable presence of mind, struck the weapon aside with her parasol. Within the hour, both conspirators had been taken into custody, the hidden workshop thoroughly searched. and Mr. Crawford released from his unjust detention. The portfolio of evidence recovered from Sir Rowland's study confirmed every aspect of Lady Molly's reconstruction. The smuggling operation, the modified parasols, and the calculated murder of Miss Fairfax when she threatened to expose it all. As we prepared to return to London that evening, Miss Wyndham came to bid us farewell, her pale features animated with a gratitude that required no verbal expression. "How did you know it was me who took Miss Fairfax's notes?" she asked Lady Molly. "How did you know I was trying to help?" "Your parasol," Lady Molly replied simply. "Unlike the others, you never allowed yours to be modified. You knew something was amiss, though perhaps not the full extent until Miss Fairfax's death." The girl nodded. She had confided some of her suspicions to me. When she died, I knew I had to continue her work, but I was afraid. "With good reason," Lady Molly assured her. "Courage is not the absence of fear, Miss Wyndham, but the determination to proceed despite it. You displayed remarkable fortitude." As our train pulled away from the station, carrying us back to London and the congratulations that would undoubtedly await Lady Molly at Scotland Yard, I reflected on the case that had now reached its conclusion. It struck me then, as it has so often during my years with her, that Lady Molly's genius lay not merely in her powers of observation or her logical faculties, impressive though these were, but in her profound understanding of the feminine sphere that men so often dismissed as trivial. Where Chief Inspector Saunders saw only a jilted suitor's revenge, Lady Molly perceived the subtle discrepancies in a lady's deportment. Where others overlooked the significance of fashion accessories, she recognised them as both the instruments of crime and the key to its solution. In a world where women's knowledge was routinely undervalued, Lady Molly Robertson Kirk had once again demonstrated that true detection required understanding of both the criminal mind and the society in which it operated, particularly those aspects of that society deemed too frivolous for serious consideration by her male colleagues. "You are unusually pensive, Mary," she remarked, glancing up from the newspaper she had been perusing. "I was thinking," I replied, "that it required a woman to solve this case, a woman who understood that parasols could be more than mere accessories." Lady Molly smiled that enigmatic smile I knew so well. "The most effective disguise, Mary, is often that which is dismissed as unimportant. Remember that when next you observe the seemingly trivial details of a ladies' ensemble." It was a lesson I would carry with me through many subsequent investigations, that in Lady Molly's world, nothing was ever quite as insignificant as it appeared, particularly when it concerned the intricate customs of feminine society. That's how Lady Molly solved the case of the poisoned parasol. Did you spot the clues before she revealed them? Let me know in the comments. This is June from Cafe Stories. If you enjoyed this mystery, hit like and subscribe for more detective tales like this. Thanks for watching.